Cassandra Monroe had been dreading this moment for 3 weeks. Not because she feared the challenge ahead, but because she knew exactly what kind of reception awaited her at the joint civilian-military firing range outside Fayetteville, North Carolina. At 28, she'd learned that certain spaces came with unspoken rules about who belonged and who didn't. The morning air was crisp as she pulled into the gravel parking lot, her weathered Honda Civic looking modest among the lifted trucks and tactical vehicles that dominated the spaces near the entrance. She'd deliberately chosen the earliest time slot available, hoping to avoid the weekend crowd, but several vehicles were already there, diesel engines still ticking as they cooled, gun cases being hauled from tailgates. She took a steady breath and lifted her rifle case from the trunk. The matte black hard case had seen better days, its corners worn from countless trips to ranges across 3 states. Inside lay her most prized possession, a custom-built .300 Norma Magnum that had cost her nearly 6 months of savings from her current job at the hardware store. Every component had been carefully selected and professionally installed: the hand-lapped stainless steel barrel, the precision-tuned bipod system, the custom stockwork that turned an already accurate rifle into something approaching perfection. The range office smelled of gun oil and burnt coffee. Behind the counter sat Dale Winters, a middle-aged man who'd been processing shooters for over a decade. His eyes immediately found her through the window as she approached, and she watched. His expression shift from boredom to barely concealed skepticism. "Morning," she said, setting down her case with deliberate care. "Cassandra Monroe. I have a reservation for Bay 13. Dale's fingers paused over his keyboard. "Bay 13? You sure about that number, miss?" His tone carried the patronizing patience of someone explaining something to a child. "That's our precision section. Most folks your age prefer the standard lanes. Less intimidating." "Bay 13, she repeated, her voice level, reserved under Monroe. He consulted his computer screen, his frown deepening. "Wow, I'll be damned. You're down here for lane 13. He looked up at her again, taking in her worn jeans, her simple gray hoodie, her complete lack of tactical gear or military insignia. "Ma'am, I got to ask, you ever shot at 800 yards before? Because that's what Bay 13 is set up for. We get a lot of special operations boys out there, retired military types. It's not really what?" The question hung in the air between them. Dale's face reddened slightly. "Just want to make sure you know what you're getting into. Long-range precision shooting isn't like what you see in the movies." She nodded toward the computer screen. "The reservation shows I paid the premium rate for precision range access. I assume that includes the right to use the lane I reserved." "Well, yes, technically." "Then I'll head out to Bay 13. She signed the waiver with quick, confident strokes and took the range map he reluctantly handed her. As she walked toward the firing line, she could hear voices carrying across the morning air. The precision section was already occupied by 3 shooters, their expensive equipment spread across shooting mats like small command centers. Custom rifles worth more than most people's cars, spotting scopes on tripods, ammunition boxes organized with military precision. The closest shooter was a man in his 40s with a carefully maintained tactical beard and the kind of 5.11 pants that screamed former military. Oakley sunglasses hung from a retainer around his neck despite the early morning hour. He was explaining something to his shooting partner, gesturing toward a target that looked impossibly small at the far end of the range. "Told you, Kevin. Consistency is everything at this distance. Wind, temperature, humidity, you have to account for all of it, or you're just burning expensive ammo." His partner, a younger man whose brand new tactical gear suggested he was still learning the culture, nodded eagerly. "How long did it take you to get comfortable at 800 yards, Brad?" "About 2 years of serious practice. But I had the advantage of military training. Most civilians never develop the discipline for this kind of shooting. They both looked up as Cassandra approached Bay 13, their conversation dying as they took in her appearance. She could feel their assessment too young, too small, too civilian. She'd felt those same eyes on her in gun stores at smaller ranges. Anywhere that precision shooting was discussed with the reverence of a sacred art. "Morning," she said politely, setting down her case at the shooting bench. "Morning," Brad replied, his tone neutral but his eyes curious. "First time at this range?" "First time at this particular facility." She began unpacking her equipment with practiced efficiency. Kevin leaned over to whisper something to Brad, but his voice carried farther than he intended. $10 says she's here for Instagram photos. You see how clean her case is? Probably never been used. Brad's response was quieter, but she caught. Fragments. ... Give her credit for trying ... And ... least, she's not wearing tactical gear she doesn't understand. She focused on her setup, unfolding her shooting mat and arranging her ammunition case. The rifle case opened with a soft click, revealing the custom .300 Norma Magnum nestled in precise foam cutouts. Despite her attempt to ignore the commentary, she couldn't help but notice the sudden silence from the adjacent lanes. Brad's voice carried a different tone, now professional curiosity mixed with surprise. "That's a serious piece of equipment." She looked up from adjusting her bipod legs. "It serves its purpose. Custom barrel work, hand-lapped, precision, crowned, that in action." Her responses were brief but accurate, revealing knowledge that couldn't be faked. Kevin was staring openly now. "What kind of groups are you getting at 800 with that setup?" Before she could answer, a new voice cut across the morning air. Well, looks like we got ourselves a social media warrior." The speaker was a tall man in his 30s, clearly the unofficial leader of whatever group had claimed the far end of the precision section. His tactical vest bore patches from various training courses. His rifle case was covered in stickers from ammunition manufacturers, and his voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged in this particular domain. "Don't let us stop you from getting your content, sweetheart," he continued, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But you might want to stick to the standard lanes for your photo shoot. This section is for actual precision shooting." The other shooters had gone quiet, watching the interaction with the uncomfortable attention of people witnessing a social mistake. Cassandra continued her equipment preparation, but her movements had become more deliberate, more controlled. "Something wrong with your hearing?" the man pressed. "I'm trying to help you out here, save you some embarrassment." She looked up from her rifle, meeting his eyes directly. "I appreciate your concern, but I'll be fine with the lane I reserved. You're a funeral. Just try not to waste too much ammo before you figure out you're in over your head." Brad shifted uncomfortably. "Come on, Marcus. Let us shoot." Marcus laughed. "Oh, I want to see this. Been a while since we had entertainment at the precision section." He turned to his shooting partner. $20 says she doesn't hit paper. At 400 yards, much less 800. The morning that had started with simple anticipation was now charged with tension. Every eye in the precision section was on her, waiting to see whether she would defend herself, pack up and leave, or try to prove herself and fail spectacularly. Cassandra chambered a single round, settled into position behind her rifle, and began the slow process of finding her natural point of aim. Whatever happened next, she was committed to seeing it through. The steel target, at 975 meters, waited in the distance, seemingly impossible small through her scope. Around her, the whispered conversations had stopped entirely. Even the morning breeze seemed to hold its breath. The silence stretched across Bay 13 like a held breath. Cassandra had been in position for nearly 3 minutes, making minute adjustments to her scope while the other shooters watched with a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed anticipation. Marcus had positioned himself at the spotting scope, clearly eager to witness what he assumed would be an embarrassing miss. "Take your time," he called out, his voice carrying false encouragement. "No rush. We've got all day to watch." Through her rifle scope, the target at 975 meters appeared as a distant steel silhouette, the orange center dot barely visible even at maximum magnification. She'd engaged similar targets in conditions far worse than this wind that could knock a bullet off course by feet. Dust storms that limited visibility to mere hundreds of meters. The constant threat of return fire that made precision shooting a life-or-death proposition. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was a civilian range in North Carolina, where the only thing at stake was her dignity and the satisfaction of proving a point. She controlled her breathing, finding the natural pause between inhale and exhale where her body achieved maximum stability. The crosshairs settled on the target, then drifted slightly with her heartbeat. Another breath, another pause. The rifle stock felt familiar against her cheek, the trigger crisp under her index finger. The shot broke clean. The sound echoed across the range, not the sharp crack of a standard rifle, but the deeper boom of a Magnum cartridge pushing a heavy bullet at extreme velocity. Through her scope, she watched the bullet's trajectory with the practiced eye of someone who'd made similar shots hundreds of times. The steel target didn't ring with the familiar metallic clang of a hit. It didn't swing on its mounting system or show any sign of bullet impact. Instead, it simply disappeared. The silence that followed was different from before, not anticipation, but complete bewilderment. "What the hell?" Kevin whispered. Marcus stepped back from the spotting scope, his expression confused. Did the target just fall over?" "Targets don't just fall over," Brad said, his voice carrying the authority of experience. "They're mounted on steel posts driven 6 feet into the ground." Range control's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. System with obvious urgency. "Cease fire immediately. All shooters, unload your weapons and step back from firing positions. Range operations are suspended pending safety investigation." Around Bay 13, every shooter followed the command with the automatic compliance of people who understood that range safety wasn't negotiable. Cassandra ejected the spent cartridge case and locked her bolt in the open position, then stepped back from her rifle with calm professionalism. "Ma'am, what type of ammunition were you using?" The range safety officer who'd appeared at her position was clearly trying to understand what had caused such an unusual result. "Custom hand-loaded cartridge. 215 grain hybrid bullet. Powder charge within factory specifications." She handed him the ejected brass case for inspection. "You're welcome." To examine it. The RSO studied the case carefully, looking for signs of overcharged ammunition or other safety violations that might explain the target's complete disappearance. Finding nothing unusual, he looked up with professional curiosity rather than concern. "Ma'am, we need to inspect the target area before we can resume operations. Standard procedure when we have an unusual result." 20 minutes later, the range safety team returned from their downrange investigation. The lead RSO approached Cassandra's position while the other shooters waited in expectant silence. "Ma'am, based on our inspection, it appears your bullet struck the mounting bolt that secured the target plate to its frame. The impact sheared the bolt completely, causing the entire target assembly to fall backward into the impact berm." Marcus stepped forward, his earlier cockiness replaced by confusion. "Wait, she hit the mounting bolt? That's gotta be impossible. The bolt's maybe half an inch wide, and it's behind the target plate." The RSO nodded. "Our conclusion is that the bullet passed through the exact center of the target plate and continued into the mounting hardware. We've never seen anything quite like it. That's..." Brad paused, his military experience providing context that civilian shooters might miss. "That's not luck. That's precision beyond what most people can achieve. Cassandra had remained silent throughout the investigation, but now she spoke with quiet confidence. The shot was intended to test the mounting system integrity. I was curious about the construction. The implication hung in the air like smoke. She hadn't been trying to hit the target. She'd been aiming for something much more challenging, something that required not just accuracy, but an understanding of target construction that spoke to extensive experience with similar systems. Marcus found his voice first. "You're saying you meant to hit the bolt?" The mounting hardware appeared to be standard military specification design, similar to targets I've engaged before. Before? Before what? She didn't answer directly, instead beginning to pack her equipment with the same methodical precision she'd shown during setup. The other shooters watched in silence, their earlier assumptions crumbling in the face of demonstrated competence that defied easy explanation. Kevin whispered to Brad, "Military spec targets? Where would a civilian learn about military target systems?" Brad's response was equally quiet, but carried the weight of recognition. She wouldn't, unless she's not as civilian as we assumed. As Cassandra secured her rifle in its case, the range began to return to normal operations. New targets were installed, safety protocols were reviewed, and shooting resumed. But the atmosphere in Bay 13 had changed fundamentally. The casual dismissal and mocking commentary had been replaced by respectful curiosity and the kind of careful attention that experienced shooters reserve for demonstrations of genuine skill. Marcus approached her position as she prepared to leave, his earlier arrogance replaced by something resembling humility. "Look, I owe you an apology for what I said earlier." She looked at him with neutral expression. "You only apologized because I hit what I aimed for. Would you have offered that apology if I'd missed?" The question was direct and uncomfortable. Marcus hesitated, clearly recognizing the truth in her observation. "Probably not," he admitted. "Then maybe consider adjusting your assumptions before you see the results." She shouldered her rifle case and headed toward the parking lot, leaving behind a group of shooters who would spend the rest of the day trying to make sense of what they'd witnessed. But as she walked away, she could hear the whispered conversation starting up behind her, speculation about her background, her training, her identity. She'd successfully defended herself against their dismissive assumptions, but in doing so, she'd also raised questions that some of them wouldn't be able to let go. The Honda Civic looked even more modest now, surrounded by the tactical vehicles of shooters who were undoubtedly discussing her performance in terms that would have been unimaginable when she'd first arrived that morning. As she drove home, she allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the loudest statement was made in complete silence. The phone call came on Tuesday morning while Cassandra was restocking ammunition at Bradley's Hardware, where she'd worked for the past 18 months. The job paid enough to cover her small apartment and her shooting expenses. Nothing more, but it offered something more valuable than money: anonymity. Nobody at Bradley's knew about her military service, her deployments, or the skills that had once made her a valuable asset to Joint Special Operations Command. "Cassie, you got a personal call," hollered Tom Bradley, the owner's son, from behind the counter. "Some guy asking about shooting." She frowned. Nobody called her at work, and certainly not about shooting. Did he give a name? Said his name was Bill something. Sounded military, if you ask me. Her stomach tightened. She'd gone to great lengths to keep her past separated from her present life, using her civilian name instead of her military callsign, paying for range time in cash, avoiding any activities that might connect her to her service record. "Cassie?" "Monroe," she answered, keeping her voice neutral. "Ms. Monroe, this is Bill Patterson. I'm the senior range master at the Joint Civilian Military Firing Range. We met briefly on Saturday during the safety investigation." She remembered him, the gray-haired range safety officer who'd examined her ammunition and supervised the target inspection. "What can I do for you, Mr. Patterson?" "Well, I'll be direct. Your shooting performance has generated quite a bit of discussion among our regular shooters. Several have inquired about your background and training. I prefer to keep my background private. I understand completely. But I have a situation I'm hoping you might help with." His voice carried the careful tone of someone making a delicate request. "We're hosting a precision shooting demonstration next month for a group of military recruiters and ROTC instructors. The original demonstration shooter has had to cancel due to a family emergency." Cassandra felt the familiar tension that came with any request that might expose her to official scrutiny. "I'm not interested in public demonstrations. I understand your reluctance, but the payment would be substantial $5,000 for a 2-hour demonstration, and the audience would be limited to military personnel who understand the value of discretion." $5,000 represented more than 2 months of her hardware store salary. It was also exactly the amount she needed to replace the aging transmission in her Honda Civic. What would the demonstration involve? Standard precision shooting at various distances, 800, 1,000, 1,200 meters. Nothing beyond what you clearly demonstrated you're capable of. She was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risks against the opportunity. "I'll need to think about it." "Of course. But Ms. Monroe, I should mention word about your shot has spread beyond our facility. Some of the stories have become embellished. It might be beneficial to set the record straight with an official demonstration rather than letting rumors continue to grow." After she hung up, Cassandra sat in the break room staring at her lunch without appetite. She'd worked so hard to build a quiet, anonymous life, and now a single shot had begun to unravel the careful separation she'd maintained between her past and present. The rumors Bill Patterson had mentioned were already starting to reach her. On Wednesday, a customer at the hardware store had asked if she was the woman who destroyed that target at the range. On Thursday, her landlord mentioned that someone had been asking neighbors about the tenant who shoots competitively. By Friday, she realized the situation was escalating beyond her control when she arrived at work to find a man in dress blues waiting in the parking lot. Master Sergeant David Hayes, according to the name tag on his uniform, was a Marine Corps recruiter whose presence at her workplace sent a chill down her spine. "Ms. Monroe, I wonder if I could have a word with you." "I'm not interested in rejoining the military, Sergeant. That's not why I'm here." His expression was serious, professional. "I'm here because your name has come up in some interesting conversations. Conversations that suggest you might be someone who served under a different name." Her blood went cold. "I think you have me confused with someone else." Fox 9. The cal sign hung in the air between them like an accusation. "That's what they called you during operations in Helmand Province. Overwatch support for Joint Special Operations. 47 confirmed kills at distances exceeding 800 meters. The hardware store parking lot suddenly felt like a trap. "I don't know what you're talking about. The shot you made last Saturday has been described by multiple witnesses. A precision strike on target mounting hardware at nearly 1,000 meters. That's not a skill set you develop as a hobby." Cassandra looked around the parking lot, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. "What do you want?" "I want to understand why a decorated Marine sniper is working at a hardware store in North Carolina instead of using her skills in a capacity that serves her country. Maybe because some people just want to be left alone." Master Sergeant Hayes studied her face with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent years evaluating recruits and reading people under pressure. "Ms. Monroe, your service record is exemplary. Your commanding officers described you as one of the most naturally gifted marksmen they'd ever worked with. Why are you hiding from that?" "I'm not hiding from anything. I'm living my life." Living your life working retail and shooting at civilian ranges when you could be training the next generation of military marksmen? When you could be part of something bigger than yourself? The conversation was heading exactly where she'd feared it would go. Every instinct told her to end it immediately, to walk away and hope that this scrutiny would fade over time. But Master Sergeant Hayes wasn't finished. "Ms. Monroe, I'm not here to pressure you into rejoining, but I think you should know that your demonstration at the range has generated interest from people who understand the value of exceptional marksmanship. People who might be able to offer you opportunities that would make better use of your talents." "What kind of opportunities?" "The kind that come with security clearances and compensation packages that make hardware store wages look like pocket change." She felt the walls of her carefully constructed anonymous life beginning to close in around her. The quiet existence she'd built was crumbling, and all because she decided to prove a point to some arrogant shooters at a civilian range. "I need to get to work." "Of course. But Ms. Monroe," he handed her a business card, "when you're ready to discuss your future, I hope you'll consider that some doors can only be opened once, and some opportunities don't wait for us to be ready." As she watched him drive away, Cassandra realized that her single shot at Bay 13 had set in motion events that she could no longer control. The anonymous life she'd built was under threat, and she was going to have to decide whether to retreat further into hiding or face the exposure that was rapidly approaching. The business card felt heavy in her pocket as she walked into Bradley's Hardware to begin another day of restocking ammunition and mixing paint, knowing that each customer who looked at her a little too long might be someone else who'd heard the stories about the woman who'd made an impossible shot. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Saturday, Bay 13, 0800. Come alone if you want answers." The message wasn't signed, but somehow she knew that her quiet days at the hardware store were numbered. Saturday morning arrived gray and humid, with the kind of oppressive heat that made even experienced shooters uncomfortable. Cassandra had barely slept, turning over the anonymous text message in her mind while trying to decide whether showing up at Bay 13 was brave or foolish. She arrived 30 minutes early, hoping to scope out the situation before committing to whatever confrontation awaited her. The parking lot was nearly empty, just two vehicles she didn't recognize and a familiar pickup truck that belonged to Bill Patterson, the range master. Bay 13 was occupied by a single shooter she didn't immediately recognize. He was older, probably in his 60s, with the kind of weathered appearance that spoke of decades spent in outdoor conditions. His equipment was professional, but understated expensive. Gear that prioritized function over appearance. "Ms. Monroe." He looked up from his rifle as she approached, his voice carrying an authority that made her military instincts snap to attention. "Thank you for coming. You sent the text?" "I did. Please, have a seat." He gestured to the shooting bench beside his position. "We have some things to discuss." She remained standing, every instinct telling her to maintain mobility and keep her options open. "Who are you?" "Colonel James Reeves, United States Marine Corps, retired. I was your commanding officer during your deployment to Helmand Province in 2018. The name hit her like a physical blow. Colonel Reeves had been the Joint Special Operations Task Force commander who'd assigned her to overwatch positions during some of the most dangerous missions of her deployment. He'd also been the officer who'd signed off on her medical discharge after the IED incident that had ended her military career. "Colonel." She stood straighter automatically, years of military discipline asserting themselves despite her civilian clothes. "At ease, Fox 9. We're both civilians now." His smile was brief, but genuine. "Though I understand you've been making quite an impression on the local shooting community. How did you find me?" "Your demonstration last Saturday generated interest in certain circles. When word reached me that someone matching your description had made a precision shot targeting mounting hardware at long range, I made some inquiries. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced since leaving the military. What do you want? I want to offer you an opportunity. But first, I need to understand why one of the most naturally gifted snipers I've ever commanded is working at a hardware store instead of putting her skills to better use. The question she'd been dreading had finally arrived. I left the military for a reason, Colonel. Multiple reasons. The incident in Helmand Province. The words brought back memories she'd spent years trying to suppress. The IED explosion that had killed 2 Marines in her Overwatch team. The guilt that had consumed her, despite the official findings that no fault could be assigned to her actions. The medical discharge that had ended her career, just as she was beginning to understand the full scope of her capabilities. I was done with situations where my mistakes could get people killed. Fox 9, you saved more lives than you lost. Your precision shooting prevented dozens of casualties during your deployment. The incident that ended your service was not your fault. Tell that to the families of the Marines who died. Colonel Reeves was quiet for a moment, studying her. Faced with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent decades evaluating personnel under stress. Is that what you think? That you're responsible for their deaths? I was the Overwatch. My job was to identify threats before they could engage friendly forces. Your job was to provide precision fire support from elevated positions. The IED that killed those Marines was buried in a road 3 kilometers from your position, triggered by a pressure plate that no Overwatch could have detected. The official findings had said the same thing, but guilt wasn't always rational. I should have seen something, done something. You did do something. You provided covering fire that allowed the rest of the patrol to reach safety. You maintained your position under fire until the casualty evacuation was complete. You did exactly what a professional sniper should do. She had heard these words before from military psychologists and peer counselors during her discharge. Processing. They had never carried the weight they carried now, coming from the man who had commanded that operation. Why are you here, Colonel? Because the country needs people with your skills. And because I have an opportunity that might help you understand that your abilities are too valuable to waste on retail work. He reached into his equipment bag and withdrew a folder marked with classification stamps. What I'm about to show you is sensitive. Before we proceed, I need your word that this conversation remains confidential. She nodded, her curiosity overcoming her caution. There's a private military contracting firm that specializes in precision shooting instruction for law enforcement and military personnel. They're looking for a lead instructor, someone who can teach advanced marksmanship to people whose lives depend on making the shot when it matters. The folder contained a job description that made her hardware store wages look like pocket change. More importantly, it described work that would allow her to use her skills to save lives rather than take them. Teaching instead of operational. Work, exclusively, no deployments, no combat operations. Just passing on your knowledge to people who need it. She studied the documents, trying to process what he was offering. Why me? There are other instructors with more experience. Because you have something that can't be taught, natural ability combined with real-world experience. The shot you made last Saturday proved that your skills haven't deteriorated during your time away from the military. That was just proving a point to some arrogant shooters. That was a precision strike on a half-inch target at nearly 1,000 meters under observation by multiple witnesses. It was a demonstration of capability that very few people in the world could replicate. The offer represented everything she'd thought she wanted when she'd left the military: good pay, respect for her skills, work that mattered. But it also meant stepping back into a world she'd tried so hard to leave behind. I need time to think about it, of course. But Fox 9, he used her call sign deliberately. You can't hide from what you are forever. Skills like yours are too rare to waste. As Colonel Reeves packed up his equipment and prepared to leave, Cassandra remained at Bay 13, staring downrange at the targets that suddenly seemed less challenging than the decision she faced. Her phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. "Saw you talking to the Marine." Interesting choice of friends for a hardware store employee. She looked around the range, trying to identify who might be watching her, but saw only the normal activity of weekend shooters. The message was unsigned, but it carried an undertone of threat that made her skin crawl. Her anonymous life was definitely over. The only question now was whether she would control how it ended or let others dictate her future. The business? Card from Master Sergeant Hayes was still in her wallet, along with Colonel Reeves' contact information. 2 paths forward, both leading away from the safety of anonymity she built at Bradley's Hardware. As she drove home, she realized that the most dangerous shot she'd ever made wasn't the one that had destroyed the target at Bay 13. It was the one that had destroyed her carefully constructed hiding place and forced her to confront the future she'd been avoiding. The surveillance became obvious on Monday morning. Cassandra noticed the same sedan parked across from Bradley's Hardware when she arrived for work. The same vehicle that had been in her apartment complex parking lot when she'd left home. The driver was making no effort to be subtle, either. He was incompetent, or he wanted her to know she was being watched. By Tuesday, there were 2 vehicles. By Wednesday, customers at the hardware store were commenting on the security in the parking lot. "You got some kind of trouble, Cassie?" Tom Bradley asked during her lunch break. "Those guys have been out there for 3 days straight." She'd been dreading this conversation. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Come on. Government plates. Guys in suits sitting in cars." "That's not exactly subtle." His expression was concerned, but not accusatory. "Look, I don't know what kind of situation you're in, but if you need help, I appreciate that. But I think I need to handle this myself." That afternoon, she made her decision. Instead of walking to her car after work, she approached the sedan that had been maintaining surveillance. The driver rolled down his window as she approached, revealing a man in his 30s wearing the kind of conservative suit that screamed, "Federal Agent." "Ms. Monroe, Agent Davidson, Federal Bureau of Investigation." He showed his credentials with practiced efficiency. "I wonder if we could have a conversation." "About what?" "About your military service record and some inconsistencies we've discovered." Her stomach dropped. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "The kind that suggests someone has been very careful to obscure their true identity and background." "Would you prefer to discuss this here or somewhere more private?" 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a coffee shop near downtown Fayetteville. Agent Davidson had been joined by a woman who introduced herself as Agent Lisa Park, also FBI. Both agents carried themselves with the professional confidence of people who were used to asking uncomfortable questions and getting honest answers. "Ms. Monroe, according to our records, you were medically discharged from the Marine Corps in 2019 following an incident in Afghanistan. Your discharge paperwork lists chronic back injury as the reason for your separation from service." That's correct. However, military personnel who witnessed your shooting demonstration last Saturday have described capabilities that seem inconsistent with someone suffering from a chronic back injury. She remained silent, waiting to see where this was leading. Agent Park leaned forward slightly. "We've also discovered that your current identity was established shortly after your discharge from the military. New driver's license, new address, new employment history. Someone went to considerable effort to help you disappear. I wanted privacy after my service ended. That's not illegal." "No, it's not. But it does suggest that someone with your background and skills was intentionally trying to avoid detection. The question is why." Agent Davidson opened a folder and placed several photographs on the table. They showed her at various shooting ranges over the past 2 years, captured by security cameras or taken by other shooters. Someone had been tracking her activities far longer than she'd realized. "We've been watching you for 18 months, he admitted. "Initially, our investigation focused on possible connections to illegal arms trafficking. A person with your skills maintaining a low profile while frequenting shooting ranges raised red flags. I'm a civilian who enjoys target shooting. Since when is that suspicious? Since that civilian demonstrates the ability to make precision shots that only a handful of people in the world can replicate. Your performance last Saturday convinced us that you're not involved in anything illegal, but it also raised new questions." Agent Park pulled out another folder, this one, thicker than the first. "We've been reviewing your military records, and there are some gaps that don't match your official discharge documentation." Cassandra felt the careful facade she'd maintained beginning to crumble. "What kind of gaps?" "Operations that appear in classified mission reports, but don't appear in your official service record. Deployments that lasted longer than your discharge. Paperwork indicates commendations for actions that aren't reflected in your personnel file." The agents were fishing, but they were fishing in waters that contained information she couldn't afford to have exposed. Her actual service record was considerably more extensive than her official discharge papers indicated, and some of the operations she'd supported were still classified at levels that would never be declassified in her lifetime. "I served where I was assigned and did what I was ordered to do." "We believe that's true, but we also believe that your actual service was more extensive than your official records indicate." Agent Davidson's tone became more direct. "Ms. Monroe, we're not here to expose classified operations or compromise national security. We're here because we need to understand who you really are and what you're really capable of. Why?" Agent Park and Agent Davidson exchanged a look that suggested they'd reached the real purpose of their investigation. "Because we have a situation that requires someone with very specific skills," Agent Park said. "Someone who can make precision shots under pressure, someone with operational experience, and someone who can maintain operational security. I'm not interested in government work. Hear us out. We're not talking about military deployment or combat operations. We're talking about a domestic law enforcement situation that requires capabilities that very few people possess." Agent Davidson pulled out a tablet and showed her satellite imagery of what appeared to be a compound in a rural area. 3 weeks ago, a domestic terrorist group took 12 hostages at a remote facility in Montana. The situation has been contained, but attempts at negotiation have failed. And you want me to do what exactly? We want you to provide overwatch support for a tactical team that will attempt to resolve the situation. The compound is situated in terrain that requires precision shooting at distances exceeding 1,000 meters. Our current snipers are good, but the margin for error is essentially zero." Cassandra stared at the satellite imagery, her mind automatically analyzing fields of fire, wind patterns, and potential shooting positions. Despite her determination to stay away from operational work, her tactical instincts were still sharp. "What makes you think I'd be interested in this?" "Because 12 innocent people are going to die if we can't resolve this situation properly. And because you have skills that could save their lives." The weight of the request settled over her, like a familiar burden. She'd spent years trying to escape the responsibility that came with exceptional marksmanship, but the agents were offering her something different, a chance to use her abilities to protect innocent lives rather than take enemy ones. "I need time to consider this. Time is something we don't have much of. The situation is deteriorating rapidly, and our window for tactical intervention is closing." Agent Park leaned back in her chair. "Ms. Monroe, we know about your guilt over the incident that ended your military career. We also know that you've been hiding from your capabilities instead of using them constructively. This is an opportunity to prove to yourself that your skills can be used to save lives. The conversation ended with exchanged contact information and a promise to provide an answer within 24 hours. As Cassandra drove home, she realized that her anonymous life wasn't just ending. It was being systematically dismantled by people who understood exactly how to apply pressure where it would be most effective. That evening, her phone rang with a call from Colonel Reeves. "Fox 9, I understand you've had some interesting visitors today. You know about the FBI. I know about everything that's happening around you right now. The question is whether you're going to continue running from your capabilities or start using them for something meaningful. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid when I left the military. No, what you were trying to avoid was the guilt and responsibility that comes with operational failure. This is different. This is an opportunity to use your skills to prevent failure rather than experience it." After she hung up, Cassandra sat in her small apartment staring at the business cards that had accumulated over the past week. Colonel Reeves, Agent Davidson, Agent Park, Master Sergeant Hayes, all representing different paths away from the hardware store and back into a world where her marksmanship skills mattered. The decision she'd been avoiding was no longer avoidable. Her anonymous life was over, and she was going to have to choose how the next chapter began. Thursday morning brought rain and a decision that Cassandra had been wrestling with all night. She'd called in sick to Bradley's Hardware, the first time she'd missed work in 18 months, and spent the early hours cleaning her rifle with the meticulous care of someone preparing for something important. The FBI agents had requested an answer by noon. Colonel Reeves had left 2 voicemails offering additional information about the private contracting position. Master Sergeant Hayes had sent another text about opportunities that don't wait. At 11:47 a.m., she called Agent Davidson. "I'll provide Overwatch support for your operation, but I have conditions. Name them." "This is strictly a one-time consultation. No ongoing relationship with federal law enforcement. No recruitment attempts. When this operation concludes, I go back to my civilian life without further interference." "Agreed." "Can you be ready to travel within 6 hours?" "I'll need my own rifle and ammunition. Non-negotiable." "Understood." "A vehicle will pick you up at 1800 hours." The next 4 hours passed in a blur of preparation. She packed her gear with the systematic efficiency she'd learned during military deployment, checked and rechecked her rifle, and organized ammunition that she'd hand-loaded to her exact specifications. Each cartridge represented hours of precise work measuring powdered charges to the 10th of a grain, selecting bullets for optimal ballistic coefficient, ensuring that every round would perform identically under field conditions. At exactly 6 p.m., a black SUV arrived at her apartment complex. The driver was Agent Park, dressed in tactical gear that suggested the operation was moving quickly from planning to execution. "How long is the drive?" 3 hours. "We'll brief you en route." The briefing package was more detailed than what they'd shown her at the coffee shop. 12 hostages, ranging in age from 8 to 64, being held by a group that federal agencies had classified as domestic terrorists. The compound was isolated, defensible, and situated in terrain that made conventional tactical approaches extremely difficult. "Our primary sniper will handle close-range overwatch," Agent Davidson explained from the passenger seat. "Your position will be approximately 1,200 meters from the primary structure, with responsibility for long-range threat elimination if negotiations fail." "What's the timeline?" "Negotiations are scheduled to conclude at 0600 tomorrow. If they're unsuccessful, tactical intervention begins immediately afterward." 1,200 meters. In perfect conditions, with no wind and optimal visibility, it was a challenging but achievable shot for someone with her training. In field conditions, with lives depending on precision, it represented the outer edge of what even exceptional marksmen could accomplish reliably. What kind of support Well, I have. Spotting team, meteorological data, communications with tactical command. Everything except a guarantee that you'll be able to make the shot when it matters. They arrived at the forward operating base just after midnight. The temporary command center had been established in a cluster of trailers and communication. VEHICLE's position 3 miles from the target compound. Activity was constant but controlled, the organized chaos of a major law enforcement operation. In its final stages of preparation, Cassandra was introduced to Special Agent Rebecca Torres, the operation commander, whose crisp professionalism and obvious competence immediately earned her respect. Torres had spent 20 years with FBI tactical units and understood the complexities of operations where precision marksmanship could determine success or failure. Ms. Monroe, I've reviewed your military service record, the real one, not the sanitized version in your discharge paperwork. Your capabilities are exactly what this operation requires. What's the tactical situation? Torres led her to a detailed terrain model that showed the compound and surrounding area in 3-dimensional. Relief. Single access road, elevated position, clear fields of fire in all directions. They chose their position well. Hostage locations? Main structure, probably the central room. Our best intelligence suggests they're being held together, but we can't confirm that without visual confirmation. Rules of engagement? Preserve hostage life at all costs. Minimize use of force consistent with mission success. Your primary responsibility is threat elimination only if hostages are in immediate danger. At 0300 hours, Cassandra was inserted into her overwatch position by a team that moved through the darkness with practiced stealth. The shooting position had been prepared by advanced scouts, a concealed hide that provided clear lines of sight to the compound while offering protection from observation and return fire. Her spotting team consisted of Agent Michael Ryan, whose 15 years of tactical experience included multiple precision shooting operations, and Sergeant Jennifer Collins, a Marine Corps sniper whose role was to provide backup assessment and communication with the tactical command. Target structure is 1,230 meters. Agent Ryan reported through his spotting scope. Wind is variable, currently 3 to 5 miles per hour from the southwest. Through her rifle scope, the compound looked almost peaceful in the pre-dawn darkness. Solar-powered security lights illuminated the main structure, and she could see movement in several windows that suggested the occupants were awake and alert. At 0530 hours, a radio crackled with an update from Tactical Command. Overwatch negotiations are failing. Subjects are becoming increasingly agitated. Prepare for possible tactical intervention. Copy. Tactical Command. Overwatch is ready. At 0547 hours, everything changed. Overwatch, we have movement in the main structure. Subjects appear to be preparing to harm hostages. You are cleared to engage if you have a clear shot. Through her scope, she could see figures moving inside the building. One man appeared to be holding what looked like a weapon, positioned near a group of people who were almost certainly the hostages. Overwatch has visual on potential target. Standing by for confirmation of hostile intent. Overwatch hostages are in immediate danger. You are cleared to engage. The shot was everything she'd trained for and everything she'd tried to escape. 1,200 meters. Variable wind. Innocent lives depending on precision that had to be perfect the first time. She controlled her breathing, found her natural point of aim, and settled into the zone of absolute concentration that separated exceptional marksmen from everyone else. The crosshairs found their target, and she began the slow, steady trigger press that would determine whether her skills could save lives instead of taking them. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with familiar authority. Through the scope, she watched the result with professional detachment while her heart hammered with emotions she'd thought she'd left behind in Afghanistan. Target down. Hostile eliminated. What followed was controlled chaos as tactical teams moved on the compound while she maintained overwatch, ready to engage additional threats if they materialized. But her single shot had been sufficient. The remaining subjects surrendered without resistance. When confronted by tactical teams, and all 12 hostages were recovered unharmed. The extraction from her overwatch position came 2 hours after. The compound had been secured, but Cassandra's mind was still locked in the focused concentration that had guided her shot. Agent Ryan had confirmed the hit through his spotting scope, a clean elimination that had saved 12 lives and ended the standoff without additional casualties. Outstanding shooting, he said as they packed up the equipment. Textbook precision under pressure. She nodded silently, her emotions still processing what had just occurred. The shot had been successful, the hostages were safe, and she'd proven to herself that her skills could be used to protect innocent lives rather than take enemy ones. But she'd also stepped back into a world she'd tried so hard to leave behind. The debriefing took place in the command trailer, while tactical teams finished processing the compound. Special Agent Torres reviewed the operation with the systematic thoroughness of someone who understood that successful missions required careful analysis to identify lessons learned and areas for improvement. Ms. Monroe, your precision shooting was the key factor in resolving this situation without hostage casualties. The subject you eliminated was in the process of threatening a child when you engaged. Your shot prevented what would have been a tragic outcome. The weight of that information settled over her like a familiar burden. She'd saved a child's life with a single shot at 1,200 meters, the kind of precision that validated years of training and deployment experience. What happens now? Now you return to your civilian life, as agreed. But I hope you'll consider that your capabilities are too valuable to waste in retail work. Agent Davidson handed her a folder containing official documentation of her role in the operation. This letter confirms your status as a federal law enforcement consultant for this specific mission. It also includes a recommendation that you be considered for future operations requiring similar expertise. I thought we agreed this was a one-time consultation. It was, but nothing prevents us from requesting your assistance again if similar situations arise. The drive back to North Carolina passed in contemplative silence. Agent Park respected her need to process what had occurred without pressure for immediate decisions about her future. But as they approached Fayetteville, the agent did offer one observation. Ms. Monroe, you saved 12 lives today. That's not something to feel guilty about. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're carrying the weight of every shot you've ever made instead of recognizing the value of what you've accomplished. Friday morning found her back at Bradley's Hardware, restocking ammunition and mixing paint as if the previous 36 hours had been a dream. But the customer interactions felt different now. She was hyper-aware of every person who looked at her with curiosity or recognition, wondering if word of her involvement in the Montana operation had somehow leaked despite official assurances of confidentiality. At lunch, Tom Bradley asked the question she'd been dreading. Cassie, I don't know what kind of situation you were dealing with this week, but those federal agents cleared out yesterday morning. Everything okay? Everything's fine. Just some paperwork related to my military service. Okay, but if you need anything time off, flexible scheduling, whatever, just let me know. That afternoon, Colonel Reeves called with news that would change everything. Fox 9, your performance in Montana has generated significant interest in certain circles. The private contracting position I mentioned is still available, but now there are other opportunities on the table. What kind of opportunities? The kind that come with security clearances and compensation packages that make government consulting look modest. Multiple agencies are interested in retaining your services for precision shooting operations. I fulfilled my obligation to the FBI. I'm done with operational work. Are you? Because from what I understand, you handled that operation with the kind of professional competence that reminded everyone why you were considered one of the best. Snipers in Joint Special Operations Command. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Colonel Reeves outlining opportunities that range from instructor positions to operational consulting roles. Each option offered better compensation and more interesting work than her current situation, but all of them required her to abandon the anonymous life she built at Bradley's Hardware. I need time to consider everything, of course. But Fox 9, you've proven to yourself that your skills can save lives. Don't waste that realization by retreating back into hiding. That evening, Cassandra sat in her apartment cleaning her rifle while reviewing the documentation from the Montana operation. The official letter described her role in clinical, professional language that conveyed the importance of her contribution without revealing operational details that remained classified. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Outstanding work in Montana. Ready to discuss your future? She stared at the message, realizing that her involvement in the operation had been observed by people she hadn't known were watching. The anonymous life she'd tried to maintain was now completely compromised, and she was going to have to decide whether to continue fighting for privacy that no longer existed or embrace opportunities that recognized the value of her capabilities. The business cards from Colonel Reeves, Agent Davidson, and Master Sergeant Hayes were arranged on her kitchen table like a hand of cards that would determine her future. Each represented a different path away from Bradley's Hardware and toward work that would make use of her training and experience. Saturday morning brought one final decision point. A knock on her apartment door revealed a woman in her 40s, wearing the kind of conservative business suit that suggested federal employment at a high level. Ms. Monroe, I'm Director Susan Walsh, FBI Counterterrorism Division. I wonder if we could discuss your future with the Bureau. Director Walsh's presence in Cassandra's modest apartment carried the weight of authority that came with decades of federal law enforcement experience. She moved through the small space with the confident assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating people and situations quickly and accurately. Ms. Monroe, your performance in Montana was extraordinary. But it also raised questions about why someone with your capabilities is working retail instead of serving in a capacity that makes use of your training. I chose civilian life for reasons that seemed important at the time. And those reasons were? Cassandra found herself explaining her guilt over the incident that had ended her military career. Her desire to escape the responsibility that came with precision marksmanship, and her attempt to build an anonymous life where her past wouldn't define her future. Director Walsh listened without interruption, her expression revealing neither judgment nor sympathy, just professional assessment of information that would inform whatever decision had brought her to this apartment. Ms. Monroe, I've reviewed your complete military service record, including operations that remain classified. I've also reviewed the FBI's investigation of your civilian activities and your performance during the Montana operation. Based on that review, I'm prepared to offer you a position that addresses the concerns that drove you away from government service. What kind of position? Special Agent in charge of the FBI's Precision Marksmanship Training Program. You would be responsible for developing training protocols for federal law enforcement snipers and providing instruction to personnel whose lives depend on making accurate shots under pressure. The offer represented everything she thought she wanted: respect for her skills, meaningful work that saved lives, and compensation that would allow her to leave retail work behind. But it also meant returning to a world where precision marksmanship was a matter of life and death rather than target competition. Why me? Because you have something that can't be taught: natural ability, combined with operational experience and the judgment that comes from understanding the consequences of precision shooting. The Montana operation proved that you can perform under pressure while maintaining the ethical standards that federal law enforcement requires. Director Walsh placed a folder on the kitchen table. This position would be based at Quantico, with travel required for training operations and occasional consultation on tactical situations requiring specialized expertise. Starting salary is $68,000 annually, with promotion potential and federal benefits. $68,000 represented more than triple her hardware store wages, but more importantly, it offered work that would make use of her training while keeping her away from operational missions that might trigger the guilt she'd been carrying since Afghanistan. I need time to consider this, of course. But Ms. Monroe, hiding from your capabilities hasn't made you happy. It's just made you anonymous. After Director Walsh left, Cassandra drove to the Joint Civilian-Military Firing Range for what she suspected might be her final visit as a civilian shooter. Bay 13 was unoccupied, the precision section quiet except for a single shooter she recognized as the gray-haired veteran who'd observed her original demonstration. He looked up as she approached, his weathered face creasing into a smile of recognition. "Fox 9, I wondered when you'd be back. You know who I am?" "I knew who you were the moment you made that shot." "Bill Patterson, Master Gunnery Sergeant. Retired. I served with Marines who'd worked with you during operations in Helmand Province." She set up her equipment with familiar efficiency, but this time her focus was different. Instead of proving a point to arrogant civilians, she was saying goodbye to a phase of her life that had provided sanctuary but not satisfaction. The target at 975 meters looked smaller than she remembered, but her shot placement was precise and controlled. No dramatic destruction of mounting hardware, just consistent accuracy that demonstrated maintained proficiency despite months away from regular practice. "Outstanding shooting," Patterson observed. "Mind if I ask what's next?" "For you? I'm considering returning to government service. Training rather than operational work. Good choice. Your skills are too valuable to waste on civilian competition." As she packed her equipment for the last time as an anonymous hardware store employee, Cassandra realized that her journey had come full circle. The shot that had destroyed her anonymity had also created opportunities she'd never expected. Monday morning found her in Tom Bradley's office, submitting her resignation with 2 weeks' notice. His disappointment was genuine, but understanding. He'd always known she was overqualified for retail work. "Cassie, I don't know what you were hiding from when you started working here, but I hope you found what you were looking for. I think I did." Tuesday, she called Director Walsh to accept the FBI position. The conversation was brief and professional, covering start date, security clearance processing, and relocation assistance to the Quantico area. Wednesday brought a phone call from Colonel Reeves, whose pleasure at her decision was evident in his voice. "Fox 9, you're making the right choice. Training the next generation of precision marksmen is exactly how your skills should be used." Thursday evening, she returned to Bay 13 one final time. The range was nearly empty, but a handwritten note had been posted on the bulletin board near the precision section, reserved for Miss Monroe. The shot heard around the range. "Thank you for reminding us that capability doesn't announce itself, it aims." Friday afternoon, her final day at Bradley's Hardware, several customers stopped by to wish her well. Word had somehow spread that she was leaving for government work, though the specific details remained appropriately vague. As she cleaned out her locker and said goodbye to coworkers who'd known her only as a quiet, reliable employee who mixed paint and restocked ammunition, Cassandra reflected on the journey that had brought her from Marine Corps sniper to hardware store clerk to FBI instructor. The anonymous life she'd built had served its purpose. It had given her time to heal from the guilt and trauma that had ended her military career. But it had also shown her that hiding from her capabilities wasn't the same as finding peace with them. 6 weeks later, she stood in front of her first class of BI sniper trainees at Quantico, wearing federal agent credentials that bore her real name and civilian title. The students were experienced law enforcement officers whose lives would depend on the precision shooting skills she was there to teach. Good morning. I'm Special Agent Cassandra Monroe, and I'll be your primary instructor for advanced precision marksmanship. Before we begin, I want you to understand that everything we'll cover in this course has one purpose: saving innocent lives through precise, ethical application of marksmanship skills. She paused, looking at each student with the direct gaze of someone who understood the weight of what they were learning. Precision shooting isn't about proving how skilled you are. It's about being prepared to make the shot that matters when everything depends on getting it right the first time. The morning's first exercise took place at the 1,000-meter range, where steel targets waited to test the students' capabilities. As she watched them prepare their equipment and settle into shooting positions, Cassandra remembered her own journey from the arrogant shooters at Bay 13 to this moment where her skills could be passed on to people who would use them to protect others. The shot that had destroyed her anonymity had ultimately led her to exactly where she belonged, not hiding from her capabilities, but using them to ensure that others could perform with the same precision when lives depended on it. Her radio crackled with a call from the range tower. Agent Monroe, all students are ready. You may commence instruction. Copy. Range control. Precision marksmanship training is now in session. As the first student took aim at the distant target, Cassandra smiled. She'd finally found the balance between honoring her skills and finding peace with their application. The guilt that had driven her to Bradley's hardware had been replaced by purpose that made every precise shot a victory for the innocent lives that depended on accurate marksmanship. The woman who'd once been called Fox 9 had found her way home. 2 years later, the Joint Civilian-Military Firing Range installed a permanent plaque at Bay 13. The inscription was simple but profound, dedicated to all who understand that true precision speaks softly and aims carefully. Excellence doesn't announce itself, it performs when it matters most. Below the plaque, range management maintained a reservation policy that had become legendary among precision shooting enthusiasts. Bay 13 remained available for monthly booking by a federal instructor whose identity was known to very few, but whose reputation had become part of the facility's permanent culture. Visitors often asked about the woman whose single shot had shut down the range for safety checks, not knowing that she continued to visit regularly, no longer as an anonymous civilian seeking to prove a point, but as a federal agent whose precision shooting instruction had saved countless lives through the students she'd trained. The stories that circulated among shooters had grown in the telling, but the truth was simpler and more powerful than any legend. Sometimes the most dangerous person on the range is the one who speaks least about their capabilities, and sometimes the most important shot is the one that proves precision can be used to protect rather than destroy. Special Agent Cassandra Monroe had learned that hiding from excellence wasn't the answer to guilt. Using excellence to serve others was. And Bay 13 would forever remain a reminder that true skill doesn't need to announce itself because it speaks clearly through performance when everything depends on getting it right. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. The end.